A single bead of sweat traced a path down her temple, a silent river against the backdrop of the desert heat, as the roar of the helicopter blades deafened everything else. Below, a cluster of Navy SEALs, a human island in a sea of dust, looked up at her F-35 with a desperate hope that felt as fragile as glass. Their radio crackled, a voice raw with static and urgency. "Valkyrie, do you have a visual? We are pinned down. I repeat, we are pinned down. We can't hold them off much longer. What's your play?" But Valkyrie, Lieutenant Eva Valkyrie Rostova, was silent. Not out of fear, but because of a ghost from her past, a voice that had haunted her for years, echoing the exact same phrase, "We can't hold them off much longer." It was the voice of her former flight lead, a man she had failed to save. The memory hit her like a physical blow, blurring the tactical display in her cockpit. A wave of nausea, a feeling she hadn't experienced since that fateful day, threatened to overwhelm her. The voice on the radio, now frantic, repeated the call, "Valkyrie, you got a plan or what?" The silence from her cockpit was a stark contrast to the cacophony of the battlefield below. She knew what she had to do, but the memory was a demon whispering in her ear, "You failed before. You'll fail again." The SEALs on the ground, their faces grim, braced for the inevitable. The enemy, a swarm of heavily armed insurgents, closed in on all sides, their bullets kicking up plumes of dirt around the SEALs' defensive perimeter. They were a handful of men against an army, and their last hope was a rookie pilot with a haunted past. Why had she frozen? What was she waiting for? The desert sun beat down with an unrelenting fury, turning the sand into a shimmering, mirage-filled sea. It was the kind of heat that made your teeth ache and your throat feel like sandpaper. But inside the cockpit of her F-35, Eva Valkyrie Rostova was in a different kind of heat, the white-hot pressure of a ticking clock. The radio call from the SEALs, their voices a mixture of defiance and desperation, was a live wire in her headset. "Valkyrie, do you have a visual? We are pinned down. I repeat, we are pinned down. We can't hold them off much longer. What's your play?" For a moment that felt like an eternity, Eva froze. Her hands, clad in flight gloves, tightened on the stick. The words "we can't hold them off much longer" were not just a plea for help. They were a cruel echo from her past. A ghost. It was the last thing her former flight lead, Captain Ben Maverick Carter, had said before his F-16 went down in a ball of fire and smoke. They had been on a routine patrol over a different desert, a different time, but the outcome had been the same: a botched maneuver, a missed opportunity, and a life lost. Ben's death had been ruled a tactical error, but in the quiet chambers of her mind, Eva knew the truth. She had hesitated. And now, as the same words crackled through her headset, that same hesitation, that same cold dread, threatened to paralyze her dot on the ground. A SEAL named Marcus Hammer Thorne, his face smudged with dirt and sweat, looked up at the circling F-35. He had heard the stories. The whispers in the barracks about the Valkyrie pilot, the one who had a reputation for freezing under pressure, the one who had cost a good man his life. He gritted his teeth, a bitter taste in his mouth. He had seen the enemy's numbers, a relentless tide of armed insurgents pouring in from all sides. His team, his brothers, were being pushed to their breaking point. They were down to their last magazines, their last reserves of strength. He didn't have time for a pilot with a history of indecision. "Valkyrie, we need a solution now. This isn't a training exercise," he barked into his radio. The frustration in his voice was a palpable thing. Above, Eva's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. The tactical display in front of her showed the enemy's positions, a spider web of red dots closing in on the green dot that represented the SEALs. She could see the choke points, the lines of fire, the sheer numerical superiority of the enemy. The air-to-ground missiles on her wings, her GBU-12 laser-guided bombs, were all armed and ready. She could obliterate them, turn the desert floor into a cratered wasteland. But her hands were trembling. She could almost feel the heat of the explosion that had taken Ben's life, the shockwave that had rattled her own cockpit. The memory was a shroud, suffocating her. "Come on, Eva," she whispered to herself. "Don't let them down again." She had been a rising star in the Air Force, a prodigy with a photographic memory for flight manuals and an uncanny ability to read the skies. But Ben's death had tarnished her record. She had been grounded, sent to a desk job, the weight of her failure a constant companion. It was only through the tireless advocacy of her commanding officer, a grizzled veteran named Colonel Sanders, that she had been given a second chance. "You're a good pilot, Rostova," he had told her, his voice rough but kind. "Don't let one mistake define you. Show them what you're made of." But now, with the lives of a SEAL team hanging in the balance, she felt that mistake defining her all. Over again, she took a deep breath, the sterile air of the cockpit filling her lungs. She pushed the memory of Ben's crash to the back of her mind, locking it away in a small, dark box. The faces of the SEALs below, their desperate fight against overwhelming odds, filled her screen. She saw Marcus Thorne, his face a mask of grim determination, firing his rifle, a lone wolf holding back a pack. She saw the others, their movements tight and efficient, a testament to their years of training. These were not just red and green dots on a screen. They were people. They were someone's sons, brothers, and fathers. She couldn't fail them. Not again. Her finger moved to the radio button. "Hammer, this is Valkyrie," she said, her voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. "I have a visual. What's your current situation?" The voice that came back was laced with a tired relief. "We are in a compound. Old stone building. They are on the rooftops. 2 of our guys are hit, but they're stable. We can't move. We need a way out." Eva's eyes scanned the terrain on her tactical display. The compound was a death trap, a perfect killing field for the insurgents. She needed to do something drastic, something unexpected. A conventional airstrike would level the building and the SEALs with it. A close air support run would expose her to ground fire. She needed a surgical strike, a lightning-fast solution. Her mind raced, cycling through every possible scenario, every textbook maneuver she had ever learned. She discarded them all. They were too slow, too predictable, too dangerous for the SEALs. She needed a new plan, something that would turn the tide of the battle in an instant. Her eyes fell on a feature on the map, a narrow, winding canyon about a mile away from the compound. The canyon was a natural bottleneck, a perfect place to trap the enemy. But getting them there would be a risk. It would mean the SEALs would have to leave their only cover. It was a gambit, a high-stakes poker game with human lives as the chips. She took another deep breath, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Hammer," she said, her voice low and confident. "I need you to move. I repeat, I need you to move. To that canyon, 1 mile north of your position. I'll provide cover." A tense silence filled the air. Marcus Thorne, his hand on his radio, hesitated. The canyon was a dangerous proposition. It was exposed, and the insurgents could easily surround them on the way. He didn't know if he could trust this pilot, this Valkyrie with the shaky reputation. He had seen what she had done to Ben Carter, or at least, what they said she had done. But what other choice did he have? They were a sitting duck here. It was a leap of faith, a desperate gamble. "Valkyrie, you got one shot at this," he said, his voice hard. "Don't screw this up." Eva didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her focus was absolute. She put her F-35 into a steep dive, the world outside her cockpit turning into a dizzying blur of sand and sky. Her engines screamed in protest as she pushed them to their limits. She could hear the faint pop of small arms fire from the ground. The insurgents' bullets a pointless rain against the armored skin of her jet. She was a ghost in the sky, a silent predator. She needed to create a distraction, a diversion that would draw the enemy's attention away from the SEALs' escape. Her fingers danced across the control panel, her movements a blur of practiced precision. She armed her GBU-12s, the laser-guided bombs a heavy weight under her wings. She wasn't going to drop them yet. She was going to use them as a threat, a phantom menace. She sent a rapid series of flares into the sky, a fiery constellation that drew the eyes of the insurgents. Then, using her F-35's advanced targeting system, she painted a spot on the ground, a spot a few hundred feet away from the enemy's main force. The laser beam, invisible to the naked eye, was a silent threat, a promise of a fiery death. She broadcasted a warning on an open frequency, a chilling message for the insurgents: "You have 30 seconds to retreat, or you will be annihilated." The effect was instantaneous. The insurgents, a chaotic mix of seasoned fighters and terrified young men, hesitated. They had heard the legends of the F-35, the ghost jet that could appear out of nowhere and turn a battlefield into a crater. The flares, the targeting laser, the chilling voice in their ears, it all added up to one thing, a very real and present danger. A few of them, the smarter ones, started to pull back, their fear a palpable thing. It was a small victory, a momentary reprieve. It was all the time the SEALs needed. Hammer, now. Eva's voice was a sharp command. Move. I'm on station. On the ground, Marcus Thorne looked at his team. Let's go. Let's go. Double time, he yelled. The SEALs, their movements a blur of practiced efficiency, grabbed their wounded and began their desperate sprint towards the canyon. They moved like shadows, their footsteps muffled by the sand. The insurgents, still confused by Eva's bluff, didn't react fast enough. The SEALs were already a good distance away, their figures getting smaller and smaller in the distance. Eva circled above, a silent guardian angel, her eyes glued to the tactical display. She could see the insurgents finally realizing their mistake. Their leaders yelling and screaming, trying to rally them. They were a pack of angry dogs, and they were after the SEALs. Eva knew she couldn't drop her bombs yet. The SEALs were still too close, the collateral damage too great. She needed to lead the insurgents away from the SEALs, to draw them into her trap. She banked a jet, the powerful engines roaring, and flew towards the canyon, her F-35 a beacon of defiance. The insurgents, a swarm of angry bees, followed her below. As the SEALs reached the safety of the canyon's mouth, Marcus Thorne looked back. The roar of the F-35 was a comforting sound, a sound of hope. He saw the pilot, a tiny speck, in the sky, leading the enemy away from them. He felt a grudging respect for her. She was a lot braver than he had given her credit for. He had to hand it to her. She had pulled them out of a tight spot. She's good, he mumbled to himself, a hint of surprise in his voice. She's actually good. But then, something went wrong. A sudden jolt ran through Eva's jet, a sickening lurch that sent her heart into her throat. An alarm blared in her cockpit, a shrill, incessant wail. Warning! Warning! Engine malfunction, the computer voice announced, calm and chilling. Right. Engine failure. Repeat. Right engine failure. A chill ran down Eva's spine, a cold premonition of disaster. The F-35, a marvel of modern engineering, was now a crippled bird, its right engine a dead weight. The enemy, seeing her distress, opened up with everything they had. Anti-aircraft fire, a deadly hail of steel and fire, streaked towards her. Eva pulled the stick, trying to gain altitude, but the crippled jet was heavy, sluggish. She was a wounded prey, and the predators below knew it. The screen in front of her, the one that showed the enemy positions, suddenly went black, a silent omen of what was to come. She was flying blind, her jet a target, and the ground was rushing up to meet her. What was a pilot to do when all her instruments fail and the enemy has her in their sights? The chilling shriek of the F-35's alarm was a physical blow, a sound that seemed to tear through Eva's very soul. Warning! Warning! Engine malfunction. Right engine failure. Repeat. Right engine failure. The voice was calm, almost bored, a stark contrast to the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. The jet, a finely tuned instrument of war, was now a wounded beast, a crippled bird with one wing. The loss of the right engine sent her into a dizzying spin, the horizon tilting and blurring. She fought the controls, her muscles screaming in protest, her knuckles white on the stick. The F-35, designed for speed and maneuverability, was now a sluggish, lumbering hulk, a perfect target for the enemy's anti-aircraft fire below. Marcus Thorne and his team watched in horror as the F-35, their guardian angel, began to spiral. The sound of its powerful engines, once a beacon of hope, was now a sputtering, erratic death rattle. The insurgents, seeing their chance, let out a collective cheer, their celebratory shouts echoing across the canyon. They opened up with a devastating barrage of anti-aircraft fire, a deadly symphony of explosions and tracer rounds. Marcus, his heart sinking into his stomach, watched as the F-35 was swallowed by a maelstrom of fire and smoke. He felt a pang of guilt. He had just started to believe in her, to respect her, and now, it seemed, she was going to pay the ultimate price for his team's survival. Valkyrie, pull up. Pull up, he screamed into his radio, his voice raw with fear and desperation. But there was no response. The radio was dead. I in the cockpit. Eva was fighting a losing battle. The F-35, its right engine a useless appendage, was a heavy weight, pulling her towards the desert floor. The altimeter was dropping rapidly. She was losing control. The computer, her silent, ever-present co-pilot, chimed in again. Warning. All systems critical. Initiating emergency protocols. The screen in front of her, which had gone black, flickered back to life, but it was a chaotic mess of error messages and red warnings. Her targeting system, her primary tool for survival, was a jumbled mess of static. She was flying blind, a ghost in the machine, and the insurgents below were closing in for the kill. The memory of Ben Carter's crash, the one that had haunted her for so long, came rushing back with a renewed force. She could see his F-16, a tiny speck in the sky, trailing. Smoke, spiraling out of control. She could hear his last words, the fear and resignation in his voice. It's over, Eva. Get out of here. You can't help me. He had been right. She couldn't help him. The memory, a venomous serpent, whispered in her ear. You're going to crash. Just like him. This is your fault. This is your punishment. But a new voice, a voice of defiance and grit, rose up to meet the memory. No, she whispered, her voice a fierce prayer. Not this time. She had spent countless hours in the flight simulator, practicing emergency procedures, running through every possible scenario. She had drilled her mind and body to react instinctively, to make split-second decisions under the most extreme pressure. She didn't have time for fear. She didn't have time for regret. She only had time to fight. She disengaged the crippled engine, the sudden silence a deafening sound in the cockpit. She engaged the jet's emergency power, a surge of energy that brought some of her systems back online. The targeting system, however, was still a scrambled mess. She couldn't use her GBU-12s. She couldn't use her advanced weaponry. She was down to a single gun, a 25mm GU-22 cannon, and her wits, she pulled the stick, her muscles straining, forcing the crippled jet into a steep climb. It was a slow, agonizing process, a testament to the F-35's power and her own sheer willpower. She had to get above the anti-aircraft fire. She had to get out of the insurgents' range. The jet, groaning under the strain, finally cleared the barrage. She was a few thousand feet above the canyon, a bruised but not broken bird. She could see the insurgents below, a swarm of angry, frustrated hornets. They were a little too confident, a little too close to the SEALs. She had to make them pay for that. She engaged her jet stealth mode, her F-35 disappearing from their radar, a ghost in the sky. She wasn't a hero, not yet. She was just a soldier doing her job. She was a professional. She had a job to do. Her finger found the radio button. Hammer, this is Valkyrie, she said, her voice a little shaky but full of steel. I'm still here. I repeat, I'm still here. Status report. Marcus Thorne's voice, full of shock and relief, came back instantly. Valkyrie, we saw you go down. We thought. He trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. Never mind. We are in the canyon. We've got our wounded stabilized. But they're closing in on our position. We've got a lot of them. Too many. Eva's mind was already a step ahead. She had a plan, a crazy, insane plan that violated every rule in the book. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was her only chance. She had no targeting system, no fancy bombs. She was down to her cannon and her courage. She needed to use the canyon to her advantage, to turn the insurgents' confidence into their downfall. She needed to become a ghost, a phantom menace that would haunt their every step. She needed to turn their own battlefield against them. She began to circle the canyon, a silent predator in the sky. She couldn't see the enemy on her screen, but she could see them with her own eyes. She could see the dust kicked up by their vehicles, the flashes of their weapons, the glint of their helmets in the sun. She could see the fear in their faces, the confusion as the dead jet reappeared, a silent sentinel in the sky. She needed to put that fear to good use. She needed to make them believe in ghosts. Her finger found the trigger for her cannon. She didn't have a targeting system, so she had to rely on her eyes, her instincts, her years of training. She had to become one with the machine, to feel its every movement, its every vibration. She put the F-35 into a steep dive, her jet a falling hawk. She aimed for a patch of ground a few hundred feet in front of the lead insurgents. She fired her cannon, a staccato burst of fire and sound that echoed across the canyon. The bullets, a deadly hail of steel, tore into the sand, kicking up a massive plume of dust and dirt. It wasn't a direct hit, but it was enough. It was a psychological blow, a demonstration of power, a promise of a fiery death. The insurgents, their formation. Broken, scattered like cockroaches, she pulled up, her jet groaning under the G-force. She wasn't done yet. She had to keep the pressure on. She had to keep them off balance. She had to make them believe she was everywhere at once. She circled back, her movements a blur of speed and precision. She fired again, this time at a cluster of insurgents huddled behind a rock formation. The bullets, a deadly rain, tore through the rock, sending shrapnel and dust flying. The insurgents, their faces a mask of terror, scattered again. She was an angel of death, a silent predator, and they were her prey. "Hammer," she said, her voice a low growl. "They're disorganized. They're scared. Now's your chance. Move out. Get to the rendezvous point." On the ground, Marcus Thorne and his team, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief, watched as the F-35, a silent, deadly shadow, tore through the enemy's ranks. The pilot, this Valkyrie with the haunted past, was a force of nature, a one-woman army. "Let's go. Let's go," he yelled, his voice full of a renewed sense of purpose. The SEALs, their spirits lifted, began their second sprint, this time with a silent guardian angel watching over them. But as Eva circled above, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm, a new voice, a new memory, came back to haunt her. The memory of Ben Carter, not as he was in the crash, but as he was on the ground, back at the base. He had once told her a story about a pilot who had been so obsessed with saving his team that he had flown his crippled jet into a mountain. He was a hero, Ben had said, but a dead hero is no good to anyone. Eva's eyes, glued to the ground, saw the enemy, still disorganized, still confused, but slowly, inexorably, reforming. She had a decision to make. She could keep circling, keep firing her cannon, keep giving the SEALs cover. But her jet was damaged. She was running out of fuel. She was a sitting duck. Or she could do something else, something that would end this battle once and for all. Something that would cost her everything. What would she choose? The ghost of her past or the lives of the SEALs below? The canyon was a cauldron of dust and chaos. Below, the insurgents were like a disturbed anthill, their movements erratic and panicked as Eva's F-35, a phantom menace, circled above. The roar of her single functioning engine, a guttural growl, was a constant reminder of her vulnerability. Her cockpit was a symphony of alarms, a litany of mechanical complaints. Fuel low, hydraulic pressure dropping, structural integrity compromised. Each warning was a tiny hammer blow against her resolve, but she ignored them. She had to. The SEALs were still exposed, still a few hundred yards from their designated rendezvous point, a rocky outcrop that offered a modicum of safety. Marcus Thorne, his heart a frantic drumbeat against his ribs, watched the chaos unfold. He had never seen anything like it. This pilot, this Valkyrie, was a whirlwind of controlled destruction, a silent ghost in the sky. She wasn't just holding the enemy back, she was breaking them. He could hear their panic shouts, their leaders' frantic attempts to rally them. He could see their formations crumbling, their will to fight evaporating with every burst of her cannon fire. He felt a grudging, but profound, respect for her. He had judged her, had dismissed her based on a rumor. And now, she was literally holding back an army for his sake. He was ready to fight to the last breath for her. I in the cockpit. Eva was a machine of cold, calculated fury. Her hands, steady and precise, worked the controls. She was no longer a pilot. She was a gunner, a human targeting system, her eyes and instincts her only guide. She put her jet into a steep turn, her wings almost scraping the canyon walls, and fired a long, continuous burst of her cannon. The bullets, a stream of molten lead, tore into the ground, creating a wall of dust and debris that shielded the SEALs from the enemy's view. It was a risky maneuver, a testament to her skill and her desperation. She was flying on a razor's edge, a single mistake away from a fiery death. Her mind, however, was a step ahead. She had a new idea, a new plan, one that was even crazier and more dangerous than the last. She had been a star pupil at the Air Force Academy, but she had always been an outlier, a rule breaker. She had a habit of finding unconventional solutions to conventional problems. And this was the biggest, most unconventional problem she had ever faced. She was a crippled F-35, outgunned and outnumbered, in a dogfight against an army. She needed to do something that no one would expect. She needed to use the very thing that was crippling her as a weapon. She had lost her targeting system, but she still had her jet's powerful computer. It was a jumbled mess of error messages, but she could still access some of its functions. She found the self-destruct protocol, a cold, clinical set of instructions that would turn her multi-million-dollar jet into a pile of scrap metal. She wasn't going to use it. Not yet. But she could use the threat of it. She could use the jet's remaining systems to broadcast a message that would sow terror and confusion in the enemy's ranks. Her fingers danced across the control panel, a blur of practiced precision. She bypassed the standard radio protocol and began to broadcast on an open frequency, a frequency she knew the insurgents were monitoring. She used a pre-recorded message, a chilling, computer-generated voice that spoke in their native tongue. The message was simple, brutal, and terrifying. Attention insurgent forces. You are in a kill zone. The American jet is equipped with a self-destruct mechanism. It will detonate, creating an EMP that will fry all electronics in a 5-mile radius. Retreat immediately or face annihilation. The message was a bluff, a high-stakes poker game. The F-35 was not equipped with a self-destruct EMP, but the insurgents didn't know that. They only knew that a dead jet had come back to life, that it was a ghost in the sky, a silent angel of death. The message was the final nail in the coffin of their morale. The insurgents, a superstitious and easily frightened bunch, began to panic. They threw down their weapons, their faces a mask of pure terror, and began to run. They ran in every direction, a chaotic stream of humanity, there. Fear a palpable thing. The battlefield, once a scene of brutal, organized combat, was now a scene of utter, humiliating rout. On the ground, Marcus Thorne and his team watched in stunned silence. The enemy, who had been closing in on them just moments ago, was now running. For their lives. What in the hell just happened? One of his team members, a young SEAL named Miller, asked, his voice full of disbelief. Marcus just shook his head, a slow, disbelieving smile spreading across his face. He looked up at the F-35, a speck in the sky, a silent, deadly sentinel. He didn't know what she had done, but he knew one thing: she had saved them. And she had done it with a courage and a cleverness he had never seen before. He finally understood why his commanding officer, Colonel Sanders, had been so insistent on giving her a second chance, but Eva, in her cockpit, was not celebrating. The alarms were still screaming. Her jet was still crippled. She was still running. Out of fuel. She had won the battle, but she was in danger of losing the war. She had to get back to the base, to safety. She had to nurse her wounded bird back home. She looked at her fuel gauge, a red line that was rapidly approaching empty. She was too far from the nearest base. She wouldn't make it. The ghost of Ben Carter, the one that had been a silent companion in her cockpit, now spoke to her with a new voice. A voice of admiration, of respect. You did it, Eva, it whispered. You saved them. She felt a wave of bittersweet relief. She had avenged Ben, not with a fiery death, but with a life-saving victory. She had proved to herself, and to the world, that she was not a failure. But now, she was alone. Alone in a crippled jet, 1,000 miles from home, her fuel gauge dropping to empty. She had one last chance, one last trick up her sleeve. A secret, a piece of knowledge she had learned from a grizzled old mechanic on her base, a man who had seen it all. He had told her a secret, a trick that could give a crippled jet a few more precious miles of flight time. But it was a dangerous trick, a gamble that could end in disaster. It could get her home, or it could send her spiraling to her death. What was she going to do? She had to make a choice between a dangerous gamble and a certain crash. The ghost of Ben Carter was gone. The only voice she heard now was her own, a voice of quiet determination. I'm not going to fail, she whispered to herself. Not now. Not ever. She banked her jet, the crippled F-35 a symbol of her resilience, and set her course for the base. But she didn't know that her commanding officer, Colonel Sanders, had received a distress signal. A signal that had been sent by her jet's crippled systems, a signal that reported a catastrophic engine failure and a rapid loss of altitude. Colonel Sanders, his face a mask of grim determination, had made a decision. He had dispatched a search and rescue team. They were on their way. But would they get to her in time? The sun, a fiery orb of orange and red, began its slow descent. Below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of violent color. It was a beautiful, but terrifying, sunset. Eva's F-35, a single, lonely speck against the vast canvas of the sky, was now gliding on fumes. The right engine was a dead weight, a silent coffin of cold metal. The left engine, a faithful but overworked servant, was sputtering, its oral complaints a constant reminder of her precarious situation. Her fuel gauge was a red line, a stark, unforgiving zero. She was a bird with clipped wings, a hero with no sanctuary in her cockpit. The silence was deafening, a profound quiet that was a stark contrast to the cacophony of the battle she had just left. The only sound was the faint whistle of the wind, the creaks and groans of the jet's strained fuselage. She was alone. Truly alone. She had saved the SEALs, had avenged the ghost of Ben Carter, and now, it seemed, she was going to pay the ultimate price. A single tear, hot and salty, traced a path down her cheek. It was a tear not of fear, but of a profound, heart-wrenching sadness. She had fought so hard, had given so much, and now, it seemed, it was all for nothing. But the ghost of Ben, the ghost that had been a voice of admiration in her mind, had left her a small gift. A memory of a conversation they had had. A conversation she had almost forgotten. They had been on a training mission, a routine patrol over a vast, empty desert. They had run into a patch of bad weather, a sudden, unexpected storm. Their jets were battered, their systems were failing. Ben, his face grim, had told her a story. A story about a pilot who had been so obsessed with saving his jet that he had forgotten to save himself. A plane is just a machine, Eva, he had said, his voice full of a weary wisdom. A life is a life. Never forget that. Eva took a deep, shuddering breath. She had to remember. She had to remember that she was a pilot, not a machine. She had to remember that she had a life worth saving. She had to remember the promise she had made to herself, the promise that she wouldn't fail. Not now. Not ever. She had one last trick up her sleeve, the one she had learned from the grizzled old mechanic, a man named Mac. He had been a gruff, no-nonsense kind of guy, a man who had seen more than his share of death and destruction. He had told her a secret that had been passed down from one generation of pilots to the next. If you ever find yourself out of fuel, Rostova, he had said, his voice a low growl, find a updraft. A good, strong updraft. It'll give you a few more miles. Might just be enough to get you home. Eva's eyes, her vision blurred by tears, scanned the desert below. The updraft. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. But it was her only shot. She looked at her navigation system, a jumbled mess of red and yellow warnings, and saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible line on her screen. A thermal updraft, a rising current of warm air, a silent, invisible hand that could carry her home. She put her crippled jet into a shallow dive, her heart a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She was a glider now, a bird of prey riding the wind. She was no longer a machine of war, but a machine of survival on the ground, a few dozen miles. Away, Marcus Thorne and his team were at the rendezvous point. They had just received a transmission from Colonel Sanders, a distress signal from the F-35, reporting a catastrophic engine failure and a rapid loss of altitude. Search and rescue is on their way. Hammer, the colonel's voice, grim and urgent, crackled through the radio. They're a few hours out. Do what you can. Marcus, his face a mask of grim determination, looked at his team. She saved us, he said, his voice low and fierce. We are not going to leave her out there. They grabbed their gear, their movements a blur of practiced efficiency, and began to move. They were going to find her. They were going to save her back in her cockpit. Eva felt the updraft, a gentle, but powerful, lift that pushed her jet higher. And higher. It was a silent, invisible hand, a ghost of hope in a sea of despair. She was gliding now, a silent, graceful swan, her jet's crippled engine a testament to her resilience. The updraft was carrying her closer to the base, closer to safety. She looked at her fuel gauge, a silent, unforgiving zero. She had a few more miles, a few more minutes. That was all. She was going to make it. She was going to land. She was going to live, but then, The updraft began to falter. The sun was setting, the desert was cooling, and the thermal current, her lifeline, was beginning to dissipate. The jet, her wings now heavy with the weight of her despair, began to sink. She was a stone in the sky, a wounded bird spiraling towards the earth. She was a few miles from the base, so close, so tantalizingly close. But it wasn't enough. The updraft was gone. The desert was rushing up to meet her. She closed her eyes, a silent prayer on her lips. She had done her best. She had fought her fight. She was ready to face the end. But she didn't know that Marcus Thorne and his team were just a few miles away, their eyes scanning the horizon, their hearts pounding with a frantic hope. They were racing against time, against the setting sun, against the laws of physics. They were coming for her. But would they be able to reach her in time? Or would they just be witnesses to her final, fiery death? The world outside Eva's cockpit was a blur of orange and violet, the last vestiges of the sun's light painting the desert in a final, defiant farewell. The F-35, a crippled bird with no more updraft to ride, was in a controlled but rapid descent. The ground, a vast, unforgiving expanse of sand and rock, was rushing up to meet her with a terrible finality. Her hands, white-knuckled on the stick, were a testament to her last, desperate fight for control. She had done everything she could. She had ridden the updraft, had pushed her crippled jet to its absolute limit, and now, it seemed, her journey was over. She was a few miles from the base, so close she could almost see the hangars, the runway, the lights of safety. But it was a few miles too far. She closed her eyes, a final, silent prayer on her lips. She thought of her father, a gruff, but loving man, a veteran of a forgotten war. He had taught her how to fly, had taught her to respect the sky. The sky is a cruel mistress, Eva, he had told her, his voice full of a weary wisdom. She gives you everything, and then she takes it all away. She had not understood him then, but she understood him now. The ghost of Ben Carter, a silent, admiring presence in her cockpit, was gone. She was alone, truly alone. She was ready to face the end, but then, a new voice, a new sound, cut through the silence of her cockpit. It was the crackle of her radio, a voice full of urgency and hope. Valkyrie, this is Hammer. We have a visual. We see you. Eva's eyes, which had been closed in a final act of resignation, snapped open. She looked out of her cockpit, her eyes scanning the horizon. And she saw them. A cluster of vehicles, a small convoy of jeeps and trucks, their headlights a twin. Pair of fiery eyes in the gathering darkness. And in front of them, a figure waving frantically. It was Marcus Thorne. They were here. They had come for her. Her heart, which had been a stone in her chest, began to beat a frantic, hopeful rhythm. She wasn't alone. She wasn't going to die. Not today. Not here. Hammer, this is Valkyrie, she said, her voice full of a relief so profound it almost brought her to her knees. I'm coming in hot. I'm going to try to put her down in the flatlands. Clear the area. Clear the area. Marcus, his voice a low, calm command, gave the order. The convoy, a blur of motion, began to pull back, creating a large, open space for her to land. They were clearing a runway for her in the middle of a desert. It was a crazy, insane idea, but it was her only chance she put the crippled F-35 into. A steep, controlled descent, her every nerve, her every muscle, focused on the task at hand. The landing gear, a clumsy appendage, refused to deploy. Emergency override, she yelled into her headset. She manually triggered the override, a series of complex maneuvers that sent a jolt of power through her systems. The landing gear, a stubborn beast, finally deployed with a groan and a screech of metal. She was coming in fast, a missile with wings, a crippled bird with one last shot at survival. The ground was rushing up to meet her, a blur of brown and black. She pulled the stick, a final, desperate act of defiance, and braced for impact. The landing was a violent, bone-jarring crash of metal and rock. The F-35, a monument to human ingenuity, skidded across the desert floor, a shower of sparks and smoke trailing behind it. Eva, her head hitting the dashboard with a sickening thud, was thrown forward, her body a ragdoll in the hands of a giant. The world went black for a moment that felt like a lifetime. And then, there was silence. A profound, beautiful silence. She was alive, she pushed herself up, her head a throbbing symphony of pain. She looked out of her cockpit, her vision blurred, and saw them. The SEALs. They were running towards her, their faces a mask of relief and concern. She saw Marcus Thorne, his face smudged with dirt and sweat, his rifle held loosely in his hand. He was the first to reach her. He helped her out of the cockpit, his hands gentle but firm. "You're alive," he said, a slow, disbelieving smile spreading across his face. "You're alive." Eva, her legs shaky, her body a symphony of bruises, just nodded. She was alive. She was taken back to the base, a hero in the eyes of the SEALs, a ghost to the rest of the world. Her landing, a crash in the middle of a desert, was a secret, a testament to the unspoken bond between a pilot and the men on the ground. She was given a medical checkup, her bruises and cuts a testament to her ordeal. She was given a medal, a small, silver token of a grateful nation. But the greatest recognition she received was from Marcus Thorne. He came to her, a few days after. The crash, his face a mask of solemn respect. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her, his eyes full of a quiet, profound admiration. And then, he did something that was the highest honor a SEAL could bestow on a pilot. He held out his hand. He shook her hand. And then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he saluted her. "Thank you, Valkyrie," he said, his voice a low, fierce whisper. "Thank you for not giving up on us." Eva, her eyes full of tears, just nodded. The ghost of Ben Carter, the one that had haunted her for so long, was gone. It had been replaced by a new ghost, a new voice. A voice of quiet competence, of moral courage, of sacrifice. A voice that whispered in her ear, "You're a good pilot. Rostova, you're a damn good pilot." The medal, the handshake, the salute, they were all symbols. But the true recognition, the true redemption, was in that whisper. She was a hero, and she had earned it. The story ends, but the legend of Valkyrie, the pilot who came back from the dead, the woman who cut the battlefield in half, had just begun.